Good morning and welcome. Richard Moore is my name from John Thompson's. It's great to have so many of you here this morning for this webinar on the subject of grassland reseeding that we have entitled Reaping What You Sow, Can You Afford Not To? The format this morning is we aim to finish in approximately an hour from now. We're joined by three speakers of note. First up is Kevin Havikias from Kilwaughter, and Kevin will give us an overview on the whole area of pH management, not only for the longer term sustainability and growing of quality grass, but also just at the point in time of germination, which is particularly relevant to this webinar just now. Kevin will be followed by Tony McIver from Gouldings Fertilizer. Of course, feeding a young grass seedling is very much the same as feeding a young animal, in that nutrition at that first stage is critically important, and Tony has gladly joined us here to give us an overview on that side of things. And lastly, of course, we can have all the preparations right, but we do need to be sure, and then whether it be species or whether it be variety, put in the right crop then in terms of the purpose that we have for it afterwards. So basically, we aim to allocate each speaker 10 to 15 minutes of a max. We'll move then into a question and answer session for a further 15-20 minutes after that. The questions can be submitted through the tab, of course, down on your right hand side there that you'll see, and we'll aim to take as many of those as possible before we close. So that's pretty much the format that we aim to stick to this morning. By way of introduction, if you just move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Grassland is very much within the tapestry of Ireland, as we know, and of course the main feed for ruminant livestock, whether that be grazing, whether that be for forage. And nevertheless, grass is a crop the same as any other crop, and its management is very important, and certainly as part of that management is rejuvenation of that grass crop. And certainly work over the years has continued to show that. This is some recent work that was carried out down in Moorpark and County Cork, and this is within a dairy context, of course, which basically showed, it's a chart showing that as we increase the proportion of reseeding on a farm, not only do we get, of course, naturally a benefit and an increase in terms of grass growth and grass utilization, as you can see by the green charts or the green bars on the chart, but equally we are able to see that that also correlates with a net profit increase in terms of cents per litre. Then that's again within a dairy context, and very much that same message can be duplicated across the beef and sheep sectors as well. So ensuring that we're working with young quality swards is very much driving a key driver of profitability in our ruminant enterprises as well. It's difficult to gauge it, but estimates would predict that we are likely sitting at around about a 4 to 5% annual reseeding level each and every year of our national sward. So it is. And if you just move to the next slide, please. And having said that, ideally we would like to be certainly increasing that. Perennial ryegrass, which is the mainstay, of course, of our Irish grassland, very much gives both the greatest yield and digestibility under Irish conditions. And again, that same work down in Moorpark showed that a new sward with 100% perennial ryegrass yielded 3 tons of dry matter per hectare more than an older pasture. And importantly, in the climate that we're working in and living in just now, a 24% improvement in terms of nitrogen utilization. Ideally, we're looking to try and ensure that our swards don't dip below that 40% of perennial ryegrass, but yet, as we all know, years differ, wet years, dry years, and certainly the rate of annual loss from a sward can be anywhere from 10 to 15%, and that's dependent, of course, on the season, on the level of poaching, on the level of trafficking from machinery, the use of slurries, how heavy our crops of silage or etc. come off at. So certainly that's a significant rate of annual loss. So really what we're needing to try and achieve, we would need to be trying to reseed our ground every 6 to 7 years on a maximum. So trying to turn over certainly 15% of our land parcel on an annual basis. It is, of course, a significant investment, both in terms of money and time. And for those of us who have to gather stones and stony land, certainly the time can work into quite some time. So it's vitally important to get it right. And that's, I guess, was the foundation and is the foundation to this webinar in terms of the importance of preparation to ensure that we get a quality sward at the end of the job. So with that, by way of introduction, I'll pass over now to our first speaker, Kevin Havikas, and Kevin will give us a run through in terms of the granulated lime and the pH side of things. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you very much, Richard. I once worked with a gentleman who was getting very close to retirement, and he was famous for repeating the line whenever anybody inquired as to his well-being, that your health is your wealth. And I always found that to be a very profound statement. And I think it's particularly applicable when we look at farming, in that the healthier soil is really the wealth of your farm. And if you don't have a healthy soil, then you're going to struggle to produce a high quality, high yielding produce or crop. So we need those high yielding and high quality crops in order to feed to our livestock, which is our source of revenue. And of course, high quality homegrown feed is always preferable to the alternative. So when we assess our soil health, then it's important to first look at the foundational building blocks of the soil, those of which being drainage and compaction, acidity, and macronutrients. So the first thing to address when we're looking to improve our soil health is checking to see if we have any, sorry, if you can still go back there for a second, Pauline. If we can first address drainage and compaction, clear any blocked drains, look at compaction and subsoil where possible, install new drains if that's an option. Look at multi-species swards that have deep rooting characteristics to fix those the drainage and compaction issues. Then we can help to increase the pore space in the soil, get rid of those anaerobic bacteria which are poor for soil microbes and soil performance, and get those sorts of issues fixed to help with the soil to maintain moisture and allow the roots to get through the crop, and then limit wheel traffic afterwards to prevent the soil from becoming recompacted. So that's your first step. The second step is to then look at soil acidity. So you need to take a soil test to determine where you're at. Of course, an acidic soil is going to lock up nutrients and prevent them from being accessible to the crop. So it's very important to get that soil up to your target range of 6.5, 3 to 6.5, and to make sure that the most amount of nutrients are available to the crop for uptake. With that, within that acidity, of course, in the soil test, it's important to note that your soil test is measuring the amount of available nutrient in the soil. So a pH of 5.5, your soil test is going to show less P and K available to the crop than what it's going to show once you've corrected that pH up to that 6.3 to 6.5 range. So you really want to make sure that once you've corrected your soil pH, you test again and look at where your soils are at in terms of the nutrient availability in reference to the indices, and then fertilize accordingly in order to get your macronutrients up to the levels that you need them to be and into your core indices. So once you've addressed those issues, drainage, acidity, and macronutrients, and you get the soil into a good stead, then you can start looking at fine tuning with the likes of biostimulants and trace elements and humic acids and foliar feeds and that sort of thing. But there's not a lot of point in spending money on those fine tuning elements if you've got any of those three core building blocks that aren't in place. Next slide, please. So it's important to understand the implications of soil acidity and how we can best correct this issue that has become prevalent on many farms across the UK and Ireland. Going back to pre-1945, there was a high amount of nutrient in the soil, but the soils were very acidic and the crops weren't accessing those. And so the government put in place a lime grant that paid farmers to use lime. And over the course of 30 years, farmers were able to improve their soil pH up to those neutral ranges and avail of the nutrients that were in the soil. And over time, because the lime usage was quite high. Farmers were mining the soil of nutrients, and at the expiry of the lime grant was the advent of compound fertilizers, and farmers were starting to see a massive result from just a single bag of applied fertilizer. As things continued to progress, lime usage began to decline and fertilizer usage continued to grow. pH started to drop. Those nutrients began to get locked into the soil again. The impact of fertilizer was quite low, and to the point today where we're needing to apply 3 and 4 bags to the acre to get the same response we used to get from 1 bag to the acre. Recent published reports show that there's a shortfall of 2 million ton of lime required in order to lift the soils in Northern Ireland up to a neutral pH, and across the GB, that number is 10 million ton in order to get those soils into the pH range that they need to be in, and it's a similar story for Ireland. So the message here is that we need to unlock nutrients, and a pH of 6.0 isn't good enough. Next slide, please. Even at a pH of 6, 11% of nitrogen, 48% of phosphate is locked into the soil and unavailable to the crop. And as Tony will mention later, phosphate is critical to the establishment of grass seedlings. And so we really need to make sure that the amount of phosphate that's in the soil is as available as it can be by keeping your pH in that 6 to 6.5 range. And we can see here on this slide, even at a pH of 6, using 27.44 value conservatively at 600 pound a ton, we're losing 90 pound of every ton of fertilizer that's getting locked away into the soil and the crop doesn't have access to. So if we're fertilizing to the N max of 250 kilos per hectare and using that 27.44, we're losing 83 pound of value per hectare in fertilizer that the crop isn't utilizing. As your pH drops even further down to 5.5, that value grows from 90 pound per ton to 150 pound per ton that's getting locked away. And that's really just a staggering number. So why does soil become acidic, and what can we do to fix that? pH is a measure of the amount of hydrogen ions that are in the soil. Hydrogen ions build up via acid rain through slurry application, through the application of chemical fertilizers, and over time those hydrogen ions just grow and grow and grow, and they lock up the nutrients in insoluble compounds that the plant can't extract. So when we put lime on the soil, lime is calcium carbonate, CaCO3, so that lime and calcium carbonate reacts with the hydrogen ions that are in the soil, and as a result we get water, carbon dioxide, and calcium. So as the soil releases that carbon dioxide that's built up in that reaction, and the carbon comes out of the soil, the plants take that in through the photosynthetic process. Oxygen replaces the carbon dioxide in the soil, and we get higher oxygen, more oxygenated soil, which again is good for pore space and allowing the soil to hold nutrients and allow the roots to explore the soil and gain access to the nutrients that are there. So lime is really, really critical to reseeding then, and that it frees up locked up nutrients by neutralizing the soil, ensuring that grass seeds have limited energy, the small grass seeds with limited energy reserves have quick access to vital nutrients that are required for the establishment. Really important then in liming to understand that all limes are not equal, and the choice of lime is very critical when it comes to reseeding. Lime is measured not only in terms of neutralizing value, but also on particle size and reactivity. Therefore, the type and quantity of lime is really, really important to ensure that the environment surrounding the seed is right from the start. Conventional lime certainly has a place on the farm, as does granulated lime, and it's key to ensure that each product is best placed to give the best results. Conventional lime would be best placed in a situation where your pH is 5.6, 5.5 or below, and you're looking at doing a full plow and reseed, to putting 2 ton to the acre on the furrow, in order to counteract the amount of hydrogen ions that are in the soil. So keeping in mind that pH scale is logarithmic, a pH of 6 is 10 times more acidic than a pH of 7, whereas a pH of 5 is 100 times more acidic than a pH of 7. So there's an exponential amount more hydrogen ions in the soil at that 5.5 and 5.6 pH range, and we need more lime to get into the soil in order to counteract all of those hydrogen ions that are there, making the soil acidic. So if we put 2 ton onto the furrow, prepare the seed bed, and then go ahead and make the seed bed ready and stitch the grass seed into that, that's the best place for conventional lime. The problem being that with conventional lime, there can be 50% of particles that are greater than 0.5 millimeter in size, 30% of particles that are greater than 1 millimeter in size, and those coarse particles are very slow to react. And so your conventional agricultural lime is going to take 6 to 18 months to give you a full lift in pH. And because of that, you're unlikely to get the pH surrounding those seeds to the right level using conventional lime during the establishment phase of seed and grass seed. So what I have a lot of farmers doing today is actually a hybrid approach where they're putting a little bit less on. If their pH is at 5.6, 5.5, they'll put a ton or a ton and a half to the acre of conventional lime, prepare the seed bedded prior to stitching, go across the top with 150 kilos per acre of granulated lime. By doing that, you get some heart and some long-term carrying into the soil, but you also get the quick reaction of G-lime, which is 100% below 125 micron, 70% below 63 micron, and those very, very fine particles are making their way into the soil very, very quickly, and they're starting to react right away, and so you get your pH right during establishment. Now, when you're looking at a pH of 5.7 or above, granulated lime is an ideal product to manage from that point, using 50 kilos per acre for every 0.1 increase in pH that you're looking to increase to attain your target. So again, it reacts very, very quickly. It starts to work immediately and gives you a full lift within 6 weeks. When you're looking at a min-till or a rejuvenated sword and you're looking to apply lime in those conditions, ground lime, conventional lime is not the best placed product because those coarse particles are more likely to sit on top of the soil. They don't have any avenue to getting down through into the profile of the soil and into the root zone. So what you end up with is 2 ton on the surface of the soil, and you make the top centimeter pH of 7.2, which is too high and causes nutrient uptake issues because your pH is at that level. And it doesn't get down into the soil profile. Conversely, when you're looking at granulated lime, because it's so fine, you put that on in a min-till situation, and those very, very fine particles will dissolve very, very quickly and work their way down through into the soil profile and give you a better reaction. So when we compare, sorry, if you could go back one slide, please. When comparing conventional liming practice to granulated liming practices, then the gray line represents, on the chart in front of you, represents ground lime. So we start at a pH, say it's 5.7. If we put 2 ton of conventional lime on, it can take up to 18 months to give you a full lift in pH. Now it will hold that pH for approximately 18 months before it begins to decline at a rate of 0.1 or 0.2 per year till we get to year 5. And we're back to where we started. At year 5, then we put another 2 ton to the acre on, and it takes that 6 to 18 months to give you a full lift. And what you're left with is a gap of up to 3 years where your pH has been suboptimal, and therefore your nutrient use efficiency has been suboptimal. Your yields have been lower, and your crop quality has been lower because the grass hasn't had the opportunity to extract the nutrients while the pH has been at those low levels. If we then look at the green line, which represents granulated lime, regardless of how you decide to get to your target pH, whether that's through ground lime or through a hybrid approach or using the granulated lime on its own, once you're at that target pH, 100 kilos to the acre is often all you need in order to maintain your pH throughout the growing season. It will decline a little bit over the rainy winter months by 0.1 or 0.2, but that repeat application every spring of 100 kilos to the acre thereabouts is enough to maintain your pH, making sure that you're attaining maximum nutrient use efficiency, high yields, and high quality crops. Next slide, please. So it really is an easy decision to make. Looking at a liming program where we're using 2 ton to the acre every 5 years over a 20-year period, in comparison to a granulated lime program where we use 250 kilos per acre in year 1, 200 kilos per acre in year 2, 150 kilos in year 3, and then the maintenance dose of 100 kilos per acre years 4 through 20, you'll end up spending over that 20-year period 40 pounds per acre less on the granulated lime program or thereabouts. And in that meantime, as I said, you'll make sure that you attain maximum nutrient use efficiency and maximum high yielding crops and quality. So with that, I'll pass it over to Tony to talk to you about the soil fertility aspect.
Thanks, Kevin. My name is Tony McIver, and I'm going to discuss the essential nutrients for reseeding. Firstly, I'm going to start by talking about the essential benefits of reseeding. Reseeding is more important than ever now with the increased cost of fertilizer. As already mentioned, reseeded pastures will deliver 24 to 25% increase in nitrogen utilization. I'm going to discuss the establishment methods and the importance of soil testing. I'm going to go through the nutrition for reseeds and then follow up with a summary. So if we look at various establishment methods, it's basically you're considering whether you're going to plow or do a min-till approach. Plowing is probably more reliable. Obviously, there's benefits leveling out land. It's important not to plow too deep because most of the phosphate is concentrated in the top 2 centimeters. So if you see a contractor coming with a big tractor and a big plow, it's important to tell him not to plow too deep. In the case of a min-till situation, granular lime is essential to neutralize any trash on the surface, because when the old sward is breaking down, acid is released, and that acid will impede the germination of the new grass seeds. Grass seeds have very small energy reserves, therefore they have a very low stress tolerance. The stresses would include low pH and suboptimal soil fertility. So if a farmer fails to correct his soil fertility, this new reseed will revert back to an old sward over time. So it's important to say, if a farmer is not going to correct his soil fertility, he might be better to abandon the plans of reseeding and improve what he has. But I think that's not the approach people want to take. But it's important to say, unless you correct soil fertility, your new reseed will revert back over time. In a lot of situations, particularly with heavy silage equipment, compaction need to be addressed. And if you plant red clover and you've compaction, your red clover will disappear very quickly. So if we look at soil testing, again, if a farmer decides he's going to skip soil testing, it's a little bit like driving a car in the dark. You've no idea where you're going. It's important to establish soil fertility levels, and from there we can work out the pH and lime requirement. P and K requirement, maybe we need magnesium and or trace elements. This will help us identify the specific nutrient requirements for fertilizer, and maybe there might be an opportunity to spread slurry or farmyard manure. Important to say also, don't over apply farmyard manure, particularly this year where ground would be very hard after the recent drought. If you put a lot of farmyard manure out, the man trying to plough the field, it'll leave the surface of the field slippy, and good ploughing might not be possible. And just because you've soil tested now ahead of reseeding, it doesn't mean you forget about soil testing. It's important to soil test again a year or 2 later and adjust fertilizer rates accordingly. So when we look now at soil testing, how we soil test, a soil test essentially is only as good as the person who took the sample. It's important a representative sample is taken. It's all too easy to walk into a field, do a small circle, and arrive back at the gate with only visiting a small portion of the field. It's well recognized that you walk in a W-shaped pattern across the field, taking representative sample, avoiding any unusual spots. And unusual spots might include areas maybe where hedges were taken out years ago, where livestock might have been fed, but anything that might cause a different result. It's good practice to sample a ploughed field, particularly old ley, after ploughing, because as I mentioned earlier, the phosphate is concentrated in the top couple of centimeters. Most soil testing people will turn around tests now in less than a week. It's important to take 20 cores per sample and to sample to a depth of 10 centimeters. And just shown in the picture there are plenty of people offering very good soil tests now with GPS grids leading to a higher degree of accuracy. So if we look at what we're aiming for, we're targeting soil indices for grassland for index 2 for P, which is 16 to 25 milligrams of Oatston P. Target 2- for potash, okay, anywhere between 121 and 180 milligrams per litre. Target pH is 6.3 for mineral soils and 5.5 for peat soils. And it's important to recognize what a kilo of dry matter removes. It will remove 8 kilograms of phosphate and 27 kilograms of potash. Very important to obviously distinguish between grazing land, where a lot of the nutrients are recycled, as opposed to silage ground, where the nutrients go out the gate. So that's showing you there in the table where we want to be in a grassland situation. Index 2 for P, index 2- for K. Very little we can do really with the magnesium. So moving on, it's important to note that we're feeding the soil all the time. Whatever we're doing, we're feeding the soil. The young grass seeds, or indeed any crop, crops drink their nutrients. Essentially, crops are fed through the root. So there's no point in having the nutrients sitting on top of the ground. They must be incorporated in the soil. So the young seedlings can take in the nutrients through their roots. Very important in the early establishment phase, particular for the phosphate, which is needed early on for rooting and tillering. Your potash essentially will drive the eventual crop yield and nitrogen uptake. Most farmers underestimate the offtake of potash in silage. A lot of the fertilizer products we use contain less than half the potash they do of nitrogen. Crops of silage require as much potash as they do nitrogen. And it's important to follow the soil report, apply the nutrients at sowing time, and incorporate them into seedbed for best results. Just to look at the graph here, this graph demonstrates that there is no advantage in going above index 2 for P and K, that there is no additional yield response. And if you're up at index 3 or 4, then you won't be allowed to apply P and K during the growing year. And it's well proven that if you apply P and K a little and often to grass, you'll end up with higher yields. So keeping the P and K status at 2- allows you to apply P and K a little and often. So now if we look at the P and K requirements for establishing grassland, this is extracted from the RB 209. These recommendations are given in kilograms per hectare. And just to re-familiarize people with that, kilograms per hectare, to convert that to units per acre and then therefore bags per acre of a product, you multiply the kilograms per hectare number by 0.8. So 50 kilograms per hectare would be 40 units of P we'd be required. So a lot of people maybe sometimes use 20-10-10. 20-10-10 won't have enough P in a situation like that. In the case of for potash, 60 kilograms is 48 units per acre. Again, if a farmer is using 20-10-10, he's going to be well shy of the potash requirement. So it's important, I would always say to farmers when they're putting in grass seeds, when you're tilling the field, you're using a tillage man's fertilizer. You're using a 10 potato fertilizer, 10-24-24, a 15-15-17. So products like 20-10-10 or higher nitrogen products are not suitable. We look at some of the nutrient quantities now required to build soil fertility. And if a farmer wants to increase the P level by 1 index or 10 milligrams per litre, this will require a huge amount of phosphate, 200 to 300 kilograms per hectare. Again, if we convert that into old money, into bags per acre, it's going to take over 6.5 bags of potato fertilizer or over 4 bags of DAP. Obviously, this won't be applied at once, but if you're coming from an index 1 of P and you want to get to index 2, it's going to take time and it's going to take money, it's going to take fertilizer to increase these levels. And again, to demonstrate the amount of potash required to move up by 1 index or 50 milligrams per litre will require a huge amount of potash, anywhere between 300 and 500 kilograms per hectare, depending on soil type. Obviously, heavier soils would require more K than lighter soils. But you're talking about 4 bags of muriate of potash, and obviously that won't all be put on at once or all put on in one season. Best to avoid luxury uptake by applying the potash in the autumn. If too much K is applied during the growing season, that would cause grass tetany in lactating animals. So this list here is showing a list of suitable fertilizer products for your reseeding. Again, low nitrogen products is preferable. That leads to better tillering. If you have too much nitrogen, you're just going to drive growth upwards rather than allowing the young plant tiller. So 10, 10, 20 or 15, 15, 17, I'm saying they're products normally used for tillage more than grassland, but these are the best products to give your young reseed the best chance of establishment. Cereal Boost is slightly lower in P, so if you're still looking for a good bit of potash, this product has less P in it, but sulfur and manganese as well. Then in slightly higher fertility situations, you could consider 18, 14, 14, or in high fertility situations, 20, 10, 10. But there's no point in putting 20, 10, 10 on index 1 soils because you're not going to meet the plant's requirement. We offer a phosphate additive, which is recommended, and people who use it get good results, and we've good level of repeat business with that ourselves. We're also able to offer any Wolftrax trace elements in any specific mix to address any trace element deficiencies as well. So once we've got our new reseed establishment, post-emergence management is important. And as a rule of thumb, it's wisest to graze with livestock. Once the grass cannot be pulled out of the ground, it's deemed safe to give the new sward a light grazing. Important, if there's any weeds have come through, to use a weed control program and to be aware whether we're trying to preserve clover or not, and select a suitable herbicide. If possible, best to graze your new reseed in the first year. That might not be possible if there's pressure for silage. And good practice to top dress the new sward with Gouldings sweetgrass. And it's very wise to soil test the following year, especially if you've ploughed, because you might get a surprise that your soil index hasn't risen to what you expect to do. So just to summarize, grass is an important crop, and grazed grass is the cheapest feed on the farm, yet it rarely earns the respect it deserves as a potentially high quality natural animal feed. That's an extract from RB 209, and just a slightly light-hearted comment. If you look after your reseed will look after you. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm going to pass you over now to David Linton.
Okay, thank you for that, Tommy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. And unfortunately, in situations like this, they always say that they keep the best one to the last, but you're stuck with me for the next 10 minutes or so. What I basically want to do, we've covered 2/3 of getting to the perfect reseed and getting things done right. Kevin has told us how to get the pH and the soil sorted out. Tony has advised us very well there on what to do fertilizer-wise, and I want to talk very briefly to you about grass species that are available to you. You can see there in the slide that the ryegrass family is split into 4 or 5 different categories there. You have a Westerwold, which is, in layman's terms, it's like a 1-year Italian. So if you're looking at your swards and you fancy a quick fix for a year until you can do a full reseed the following year, it is possible that you might want to go down that route. Or if you're a wee bit tight for Connacht or land, you just need as much grass as you possibly can in a short space of time, then certainly that's something you should be considering. Italian ryegrass, everybody knows the score with Italian. It's like a 2 to 3 year crop. A hybrid ryegrass then is a cross between an Italian and a perennial, where you're getting the yield benefits from the Italian, but you're getting the quality and a wee bit of the sward density benefits from the perennial ryegrass as well. But the harsh reality in Northern Ireland, neither of the 3 of those ryegrasses are probably that overly applicable, and I would imagine slightly over 80% of our swards here are perennial ryegrass based. So as well as that, then I want to look at, in the next slide we'll look at perennial ryegrass, but I want to look at strong creep and red fescue as an option maybe for heavier land. And there's an awful lot of talk going on at the minute about multi-species swards. And multi-species swards aren't necessarily just swards that contain herbs. You can have a multi-species grass sward, maybe based on somewhat on perennial ryegrass, timothy, cocksfoot, and tall fescue as well. And then, of course, I'm going to cover a wee bit about red and white clover. So we'll slip on to the next slide here and we'll take a look at perennial ryegrass. There we are. So perennial ryegrass, as everybody knows, that they're split into 2 different categories. You have a diploid perennial ryegrass, which is basically your natural perennial ryegrass that has always been about. And then somebody somewhere many years ago doubled up the chromosomes of a diploid perennial ryegrass and created this fantastic grass on the right-hand side called a tetraploid. Now, tetraploids, higher yielding, they want to jump out of the ground, higher water-soluble carbohydrates, they're higher in sugar, stalk are mad about them, they're very palatable. But one of the downs, you might look at that and think to yourself, well then why are we bothering with diploids, why are we not going all tetraploid? And that would be fine if you were in a really dry farm. You probably could get away with a higher proportion of tetraploid, but they are a naturally more open growing grass, and they would be a softer grass. And if you're in sort of heavier conditions, or if you're heavily stocked, the higher the proportion of tetraploid that you would have in your sward, the less likely it would be for your sward to remain in place for years to come, because obviously the stock and the heavy conditions and everything else, the tetraploids will start to die back, and that's whenever weeds and weed grasses can start to slip in. So if you're putting together a grass seed mixture, my advice, unless, as I say, you're on really dry land, you'd be looking at a grass seed mixture somewhere in the region, ballpark figure of 2/3 diploid and 1/3 tetraploid. And the glory of that is you're getting the benefit of both camps. You're getting all the benefits of the diploid, you're getting the sward density, you're getting the durability. It's able to carry a bit of machinery, carry stock, and if you get a wee wet week in the middle of the summer or something like that, it'll carry stock. You're not as likely to prune, but at the same time you can add the tetraploid in along with the diploids, and that'll give you all the benefits from tetraploids, as I've already mentioned. Now, perennial ryegrasses can, of course, just slip back to that one a wee minute, please. Perennial ryegrasses can, of course, also be categorized into their heading dates, and you have earlies, intermediates, and lates. Early heading varieties are sort of the first half of May. Intermediate are from the middle of May on to the end of May, and then anything that's late heading is tailing off into June. If you are considering a grass seed mixture, I would emphasize you really need to pay particular attention to the heading dates of the grasses that you're looking at, because obviously if you're not cutting your silage, or if you're not turning your stock out particularly early, but if you're not cutting your silage until the end of May, there's no point in having grasses that are heading at the start of May, because by the time you get around to your silage, should it be because of bad weather or because of a delay with contractor or something like that, that grass has started to put the seed head out, it's starting to go stemmy and everything else. It's lost its quality, it's lost its palatability. Yes, you've gained a wee bit on bulk, but certainly the quality has gone out of that. So if you could try your best whenever you're choosing your mixtures to aim for the heading dates and try and keep those heading dates as close to when you intend to cut, or when you usually cut or hope to cut, you'll not be too far away. Obviously, the later you go, the bigger the safety net that you have, your grass will maintain its leaf and maintain its quality right up to the very end. But bear that in mind then for the early turnout as well, because the later heading grasses maybe aren't just as quick to go with their spring growth, although thankfully there are some bred varieties that do have particularly good spring growth, but just bear that in mind that if you need grass early in the year, yes, it's good to have lates in the mixtures, but you're going to need something in there to give you a wee bit of a kick. So then just as a partner grass for perennial ryegrasses in a mixture, on the next slide, then we're going to look at Timothy. Now, Timothy is one of those things, it's a bit like Marmite. People either love it or they hate it. If it's properly managed, a colleague of mine many years ago called it the equivalent of a spoonful of sugar in a cup of tea. Properly managed and kept at the leaf stage, Timothy is probably one of the most palatable grasses that you'll get, and stock are absolutely mad about it. Many years ago at Loughgall, we had a grazing trial where we were putting dairy cows into a field, and we had the field split into blocks of different grasses. And every time we put them in, they went to the Timothy first. People get concerned about Timothy because they say it has a tendency to take over the sward and things like that. Timothy will grow in cool, damp conditions. It will grow in extreme conditions where perennial ryegrass may not. Perennial ryegrass naturally takes a sort of a fortnight of a break about the start of July. And it just slows down its growth to recover for the second half of the season. But Timothy, because of its deep rooting structure, and it's able to just keep going and will grow in any sort of conditions, Timothy keeps rattling through, and that's where you need to keep an eye on it just for the second cut silage, because that's where people tend to see that it's starting to take over a wee bit in the sward. As far as your grazing platform is concerned, you know, if you're looking for grass to graze stock through the winter time, should it be lambs or sheep or whatever the case may be, Timothy's ideal, because as I say, it does keep growing through cooler, damper conditions. And again, it will give you that bit of spring growth and a wee bit of grass at the back end as well, to try and broaden the grazing platform right throughout the season. And then another variety that has sort of come back to light again is cocksfoot. And again, if you're talking to some of the previous generations of farmers, they would say, oh, cocksfoot, we couldn't wait to get rid of it. It grows into our rough, tufty stuff and nothing likes it. Times have changed. You know, we're not driving Model T Fords anymore, and the car industry has moved right up from petrol to diesel, and now it appears to be going electric. And grass breeding is exactly the same. It has moved with the times. Cocksfoot, definitely, as far as shoulder growth is concerned, it is very aggressive growing. It will give you plenty of growth at the start of the year and plenty of growth at the back end. So again, it's extending your grazing season right open, right throughout the year. Very useful in extreme conditions. It's a good deep rooting plant. So like Timothy, it's an excellent thing to have on a sward along with perennial ryegrass because of the deep roots. It helps with sward density, but on top of that, it can stand a wee bit of wear and tear, that if a damp spell of weather comes in and there's a wee bit of tramping, the wee bit of root structure in many ways protects the perennial ryegrasses and protects the swards, and makes sure that no matter how big a tramping or how much damage is done, should it even be with silage machinery, there'll always be something there whenever things start to pick up again. The only thing I would say about cocksfoot, the varieties now are bred for purpose. They're nicer, softer leaf varieties. Stock are keen on them. They are very palatable. But just whenever you're choosing a mixture, keep an eye that it is one of the modern bred varieties of cocksfoot. As I say, you don't want to go back to the way the things were. And then, of course, tall fescue. And as I say, we're now getting, I'm talking about Timothys and cocksfoots and tall fescues. We're now getting into what we're talking about, multi-species swards. It is a perennial species. Extreme conditions. Should it be really, really damp conditions? Should it be really, really dry conditions? And by really dry conditions, I mean probably what they're suffering in mainland UK at the minute. Drought, because the root structures. Look at the roots on the picture on the slide there. The roots are going into the belly of the earth. They're getting water from the depths of the earth. They're getting nutrients from the depths of the earth. The beauty of that is they're wear tolerant. That they're again giving you good shoulder growth at both ends of the grazing season. It's opening the grazing platform right up to both ends of the year. But because the root structure is going down in that far, if you have land, or if you're even considering with the price of fertilizer, Tony, my apologies, you won't want to hear me saying that. If you're considering stepping back into a sort of a less intensive input system, where you're thinking to yourself, maybe just a bit of slurry, maybe just depend on clover to produce the nitrogen, these are the sort of swards you should be thinking of. Because of the root structure, they're less dependent on added nitrogen and can certainly stand on their own 2 feet as far as that's concerned. To give you an idea of that, if I just move on to the next slide, root structure over on the right hand side, you can see there on the left that the perennial ryegrass roots are going down roughly about 25 centimeters. Tall fescue down the guts of 100 centimeters. As far as roots are concerned, it's the daddy of them all. It can get nutrients, it can get water right from the belly of the earth, and it's bringing all that up to the plant, making it available to the animal, and stock absolutely love it. To give you an idea of a multi-species mixture, it's been no way trying to plug anything for ourselves, but we have been using a mixture called Barmix this few years, and you'll see there are two varieties of perennial ryegrass on there, both late heading, and then we have our tall fescue, our cocksfoot, our timothy, and our white clover blend. If you're cutting back on your inputs, perfect mixture for that job. As I say, you have the benefits of the perennials, but you have also the benefits of the deeper rooting varieties that can pull everything up. They're bringing protein, stock or clean mat about it, and you might look at that mixture and you would say to yourself, you know what, I remember cocksfoot and tall fescue and timothy from years ago, and you wouldn't put it out in front of an animal. If I just move to the next slide here and show you one photograph, and then I'll show you a few more in the slide after that. You can see there in the bottom right hand side, that's a field of Barmix growing. Can withstand more extreme conditions, should it be wet or should it be drought, whatever the case may be. And again, that's all down to the rooting of that. We're using modern purpose-bred varieties. We're not going back to the way things were 30 years ago. As I say, grass breeding has moved on, and these are really things that people should be thinking about. The beauty about tall fescue is, even though it heads, unlike perennial ryegrass, it will maintain its quality for an awful lot longer. A perennial ryegrass, once it puts out the seed head, all it wants to do is put all its energy into filling out the pickle of seed, and that takes the energy out of the plant. Tall fescue is not the same, and it does hold its quality for a good bit longer after that. It will produce more grass than a conventional ryegrass sward, either under low fertility conditions or under low fertilizer usage. We have trialled it ourselves at Cropfield Farm over across the water, and it yielded conventional lace by 19% using only white clover. It out-yielded conventional lace by 14% whenever we were in a normal system of applying nitrogen. So I don't want you to think that this is for an out farm on the side of a mountain somewhere where you're never taking nitrogen to. If you have fields around at your own place and you're thinking of just cutting back on your fertilizer usage, this is still a good suitable mixture for that. And I said earlier on, protein wise, 9% higher protein, and because obviously the deep rooting varieties, you have your timothy in there, the cocksfoot and the tall fescue, that's extending your grazing season, and we have 15% higher spring growth. To put it into harsh reality, this is an example here. This is from Denise Rafferty. Denise, many of you will know, works for Thompson's. This is 3 photographs from a field of Barmix that Denise sowed last August, and it was sown towards the end of the month. Basically, once she did the pluck test that Tony referred to earlier on, and she knew she could get stock into it, she put the sheep into it, and it was grazed until early March. The sheep were pulled out. It got no slurry, it got no farmyard manure, but it did get 2 hundredweight of 2844, and that was applied on the 23rd of April, and these photographs were taken on the 22nd of May. As I say, that's just an idea of what Barmix could do for you, or what a multi-species sward could do. And if you're not that fussed and going down the line of herbs, there are still plenty of multi-species options for you. White clover wise then, of course, white clover is, well, it's the backbone of mixers and has been the backbone of mixers in this country for years now. The beauty about white clover is it is tolerant of wetter ground, and well, we have plenty of wet ground here in Northern Ireland. Stock do love it. It improves the protein levels of a sward. We've seen it in trials again where we've had blocks of grass with no clover and blocks with clover, and the stock always head for the clover blocks first. White clover, of course, is stoloniferous, so if you have a clump of white clover growing and an animal goes over and reaches into the middle of it and pulls it out, it won't recover. It'll fill in the gaps and will creep and crawl along the top of the ground. Leaf size, there are different leaf sizes in clovers. There's small, medium, large, and very large. Personally speaking, I prefer to go for clover blend if I'm putting together a mixture, because clover is no different to perennial ryegrass. And the reason we go for mixtures in perennial ryegrasses is perennial ryegrass growth will peak and trough right through the year. Clover is no different. So if we're putting together a mixture of perennial ryegrasses to compensate for whenever one perennial is taking a rest, and other ones maybe just coming to life, and vice versa, clover is exactly the same. So if you go for a good clover blend, then that means you've level production right throughout the year. It does, of course, it is a natural nitrogen contributor, but intake wise, sward protein level wise, and everything else, white clover really is worth considering. If you're looking at your own swards at the minute and you don't have clover, maybe you have to ask yourself the question, well, is white clover then? Should I really be thinking about clover? Because if you don't have clover at home, maybe you need to take a look at your soils, like Kevin has already said. I can establish white clover easily in the rubber ring around the boot of the car, so it is very easily established. But if your soil's not right, it's not going to last. Maybe you're spraying for weeds, and again, maybe that's something you want to consider and get your weeds under control before you think about clover. But all the options are there, and as I say, it's very easy rectified if that is the case. But then red clover, just to give you a bit of a wee run on red clover grows as an individual plant, very high in protein, and it will again fix a lot of nitrogen in the sward. Big, tall, upright plant, but it does grow as an individual plant. Very suitable to cutting, but whenever you are cutting, just bear in mind to keep an eye on the crown at the bottom of the plant, because that's where your regrowth's coming from. And if you do shave it too tight and remove the crown, that's it dead in the water. If you do put stock into it later on in the year to do a wee bit of grazing, it's totally different to white clover. The white clover will recover, but the red clover, once the animal grabs a hold of it, and because it's such a big tall plant, the animal grabs a hold of it and pulls it out, that's the plant gone if the root's pulled out with the plant at the same time. So bear that in mind as well. One thing I would say about red clover is choose your fields carefully. It doesn't like getting its feet wet. It doesn't like standing in water. So if you've got good, dry, free draining soil, perfect for red clover. It's not dynamic compaction either. So again, just bear that in mind. You know, if you're lifting grass and you maybe have a couple of red clover fields set over to one side, maybe keep a wee eye on the weight of the silage that's going into the tillers. Maybe go for 2/3 of a load as opposed to a full load whenever you're traveling up and down the field, just to give it a bit of a chance. But folks, that's a very brief rundown on what's available from the grass seed side of things. And I'm more than happy to hand back to Richard. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our three speakers there. We said at the start it was vitally important to get the job right, like so many jobs in agriculture, and certainly our three speakers here have given us a great overview, in my mind, on their three relevant areas about how to get it right, because it's a significant investment. And of course, we live in a very fluid world in terms of costs, and that very much applies also to reseeding. And I would say for very rough counting, just now, a full reseed, now this is counting everything from the initial spraying off to the final, you might say, post-immersion spray and everything in between. But you could be looking here, certainly in the current scenario, anywhere from 400 to 450 for a full plough reseed. So it's a significant investment. It's significantly important to try and get that right. And yet, it's like any investment. It's all about the return on investment. So it is. And if you take, without trying to put too many figures to this, if you take the scenario whereby the work in Moor Park showed that we were getting that 3 tons of dry matter per hectare per year more, that equates to, for a baling man, 6 bales per acre over the year extra. For a cutting man, that equates to another trailer load for every 2 acres that's ensiled from a recently reseeded sward, again over the year. And just in the current climate, if you put a value in that, as I would say, it's not a million miles from it, of sort of in around that £200 per tonne of dry matter, you're looking there at an extra income from your reseeded sward of £600 over the course of the year in terms of extra forage production. So in terms of quantity alone on the economics, the cost of reseeding, even at the current cost, is certainly paid for before the end of year 2. And that's just one side of the equation. Of course, the other side of the equation that draws a little bit closer to I guess, the feed side of things, silage quality is the ultimate driver in terms of performance, whether that be lamb growth, whether that be daily live weight gain in a 500 kilo bullock, or whether that be milk yield out of a 40-litre cow through a robotic system. So it is. And these two particular graphs just very quickly demonstrate the benefit that silage digestibility will have in terms of both milk yield, in terms of daily live weight gain, and the resultant benefit there in terms of being able to cut back that little bit in terms of feed usage. So the silage quality element of the situation, that's the icing on top of the cake that very much then leaves the economics running in a farmer's favour. And really and truly, the situation, if you just move to the final slide, sorry, it was always said that within grassland agriculture, you know, reseeding was one of the safest investments that the man or woman could make, for that matter. And that's very much still the case. In terms of livestock performance, in terms of growing sufficient quantity of high quality grasses to feed livestock, whatever they may be, it's a total no-brainer, and it remains that way. And equally, when we look at the situation that we're all under pressure with now, the environmental sustainability, the increased cost of fertilizer that looks like not going to change dramatically in the foreseeable future, that 24% or 25% improvement in terms of nitrogen utilization, the reseeding message really starts to stack up in a very significant way. So it is. So with that, we will move, I believe, to our question and answer session, and there are questions. We'll bring our speakers in now together if we can. Coming in here now. A bit of colour back on their faces now. Yeah, so there's a few questions have come through here. Just making a note here. Certainly, can you give a good overview, of course, on the importance of lime, Kevin? And you maybe did give some of this in your presentation, but where we have a very low pH within our field, 5.4, 5.5, how would you address that? What's the best way of addressing that just now? Reseeding is the question we have here from an Antrim attendee.
Yeah, so even at a pH of 5.4 or 5.5, you know, as I said, that's really quite low, and we would probably look to address that via ploughing and putting conventional lime on the furrow. But as I said, that conventional lime and the conventional lime can certainly have an impact on the speed of reactivity of the lime. So I would probably look at a 5.4, putting on 1.5 tons to the acre of conventional lime, and then making the seed bed ready, and then going with that hybrid approach where I would put 150 kilos of granulated lime on the seed bed prior to stitching, and then you're getting the best of both worlds. You're getting a lot of heart into the soil with the conventional lime and some long-term carry, but you're also getting the speed of reactivity of the granulated lime in the root zone right around those small seedlings that have very limited reserves in the seed in terms of getting them up and going. So you're getting the pH right to maximize the nutrient availability around those seedlings and get things off to the best start.
Okay, Kevin, thanks for that. Tony, we've gone through here just in terms of your own subject, I guess. Yeah, there's that wee bit of debate, I guess, in terms of species, in terms of clover and fertilizer reduction. What's your thoughts on the use of those varieties, those species, and their potential to reduce fertilizer use? Tony?
I think clover and/or multi-species have a place in farming going forward, but it's probably important to say they're not for everybody. They do have a bigger role to play on less intensive farms, but if you're going to be pushing for high yields of grass, you're undoing some of the good, really. You know, it's important to probably say that in the case of, say, multi-species, particularly some of the broadleaf plants, are not as responsive to fertilizer. So if you've got high stocking rate and you intend spreading a lot of nitrogen, then multi-species is not for you. Likewise, if you've high stock numbers, maybe clover will play a limited role, but you couldn't depend on it entirely.
Okay, yeah, it's good to get your thoughts on that, Tony, and thanks for that. David, we'll run through here just, I guess, on a same line from a viewer wondering what's the best method for stitching clover into an existing sward, and what is the success of that you tend to find on the countryside?
Yeah, well, it can be done. I suppose, as I said earlier on, Richard, in the slide or in the presentation there, the most important thing is obviously realizing why you don't have clover in the first place. So if it's because you've been spraying for weeds of that, make sure they're under control. Ideally, if you were trying to stitch into a silage sward, ideally going in immediately after the cut into the fresh stubble. Clover seed doesn't need to be buried into the depths of the earth, but it does need seed to soil contact. I know on the British Grassland Society tour there a couple of weeks ago, John Edgerton down in Fermanagh had stitched in some clover, and he had got it perfected that it was about maybe even slightly less than 4 mil below the surface. which was enough just to get the clover plant in touch with the soil, get it a chance to get in touch with some moisture, give it a chance to get rooted and get established and get away. Going any deeper than that, then of course you run the risk. Of course, the next thing you'll do is come on with a plaster of slurry and cover it over. And by the time the wee plant gets up through, if you have a dry spell of weather, then it struggles to break through the crust. But in an ideal world, yes, there are machines out there that can do it. But if you can get the soil roughened at all, should it be with a disc harrow or a pin harrow or whatever the case may be, you can get it roughened at all, get the clover broadcast onto it or sewn onto it, and a wee light run with a roller just to, as I say, to get it in touch with the soil and get it in touch with a bit of moisture. It'll get away the very best. I did see there, I think it's Albert and O'Neill come up with the idea up near Strabane, where you have the wee thing that sits on the side of the slurry tanker, where you can actually dribble the slurry or dribble the clover into the slurry as you're filling the tanker. And again, you know, it's an ideal way to get it fired back out onto the ground again and give it a wee bit of a kickstart to get it going. I know people who are dropping bits of clover into sheep feed, because obviously what goes in has to come out, but it is really easy to do. But again, it's back onto everything that has been covered so far in the presentation. If the soil's not right, the clover, it doesn't matter what way you try to establish it, it's not going to come. That's just the long and short of it. But not rocket science. It should be very easy to establish it.
Yeah, no, that's good, David. Again, there's a thread coming through there just from a couple of attendees, Kevin. And as I say, it's probably on the back of, I suppose, a difficult couple of months to start us off. In terms of sward rejuvenation at this stage, so swards that maybe have been tramped or poached, how would you use G-lime or how would you use granulated lime in a scenario to help rejuvenate a sward just now?
Yeah, so once again, I mean, you're going to have to do a soil test to determine where your pH is at. And if you don't know where you're at with pH, then it's really hard to get where you're going. It's like being put in the middle of a maze in the dark and trying to find your way out. So by doing a soil test and determining where your pH is at, then you can determine how much lime you need. Granulated lime is certainly the best option for sward rejuvenation or min-till situations, because the particles are so fine. 100% of the material that makes up the pellets is below 125 micron and 70% below 63 micron. So it's microscopic particles in size that are going to work their way through the soil fissures once they're applied and dissolved with a little bit of moisture on the surface of the land and work their way into the soil profile. So you want to, rule of thumb is 50 kilos for every 0.1 of increase that you're looking for. So if you're looking to go from say a 5.9 to a 6.3, you're looking roughly 200 kilos to the acre in order to get yourself into that situation where your pH is neutral, and that's going to give you the best chance of making the phosphate that's in the soil and locked away available in any applied nutrients, whether that be through slurry or farmyard manure or chemical fertilizers, and it's going to prevent those nutrients that are in them from being locked away by getting that pH up into that neutral range.
Yeah, that's good, Kevin, and thanks for that. Tony, I have three here in the same thread for you, and whether you want to answer this or not, I don't know, but fertilizer prices, and I suppose it does nevertheless tie into our overall message, but what is the outlook as you see on that side of things, Tony?
I didn't think I was going to escape this. First of all, this was always going to come as a question. At the moment, unfortunately, there isn't much chance of fertilizer coming back to levels we were used to. What is the main driver? The main driver essentially is gas price. If we go back to last summer, there was a small increase in fertilizer price. But once we got into September, what actually happened was gas tanks at terminals, at every port around, storage levels, fill level is the correct term. There wasn't sufficient gas in storage tanks. The gas wasn't filled up during the summer because gas was seen as too expensive. Summer 21. So then we went into autumn 21 with low levels of gas in storage tanks. Then what happened when the gas price went up at the end of September, early October, manufacturers, European manufacturers, actually stopped producing fertilizer because it was costing too much to make and the market wasn't paying the price that the manufacturers needed. So there was almost 2 months production lost last autumn. So then we came into the spring at higher levels, and farmers were not all that happy paying the price, but they said we've no choice. And then obviously when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was obviously sanctions against Russian suppliers, and some of the European production plants are owned by Russians or Russian involvements, and there were sanctions against those factories as well. So therefore there was far less fertilizer available on the market. What probably happened after that was, once the price went above a certain level, a lot of farmers said we're not paying that price. And 2022 for a lot of people has probably been one of the best growing years in recent history. People in a lot of situations got away with little or no fertilizer. It's unlikely that sort of strategy will work again in 2023, but at the moment there's nothing to suggest fertilizer is going to drop in the short term, unfortunately, due essentially to the war and gas price.
There you are. That's the world we live in, and that's the way it is. No, but thanks for that update on that, Tony. David, I think I had one final one here coming through for yourself. Sorry, multi-cut systems, David. And I suppose a reasonably common thing, I suppose, amongst the more intensive dairy units in terms of variety choice. You know, that 5-cut type system, end of April, moving forward there. Where's your thought on that, David? I think we've just lost your mic there, David.
That's me going now. Sorry about that. We got a delay there. I suppose realistically, you would have been taking people back towards the like of hybrid swards and things like that there. The beauty, and I touched a wee bit on it with some of the later heading varieties. I touched a wee bit about it in my presentation. Really, what you're looking for in a case like that there is good spring growth. You know, we're seeing cutting dates for silage and those more intensive systems get better every year. And there are some varieties there. There are some varieties that have been bred here in Northern Ireland down at Loughgall that are producing nearly as much spring growth as a hybrid ryegrass would. So again, it would be a matter of taking a good look at the perennial varieties that are available first, because if you work with a perennial variety, my opinion in this context, if you take a look at the perennial ryegrass varieties, some of them could nearly be edging up towards the same similar yields to a hybrid ryegrass. But the beauty of that is that you're getting nearly the same yield as the hybrid ryegrass, but you also have the safety net that you have that extra few years left in the sward. The hybrid ryegrass is under a bit of pressure. Will probably be starting to die off after about 5 years, 4 or 5 years. Perennial ryegrasses should be stretching that wee bit further. And I know it's an intensive cutting system, and I know that's going to take a wee bit off it, but you still will get that extra 2, possibly 3 years. Some of the perennial ryegrass are doing that. Again, you know, you have a nice dense sward that you could turn stock into at the back end. You have a nice, easier managed sward. Like a hybrid ryegrass, you do have to bear in mind that there's a bit of Italian in there. So, you know, it's going to want to grow, it's going to want to produce seed head, and it's going to want to jump out of the ground as quickly as possible. Not just as bad as an Italian, but you do have a wee safety net built in there that, say, for instance, you are aiming to cut around about the beginning of May or even the end of April, and you get a wet fortnight. At least by the time you get back to the field, you still have a nice perennial ryegrass sward. You haven't something that is run to stem or run to seed head, and really you're sort of losing what you're trying to gain in the first place. But there are plenty of options there. Just talk to your seed supplier. Just don't leave it to the last minute and go and lift whatever you see, and don't try and steer yourself down the one direction. There are plenty of options, and certainly I'm sure myself or any of the other seed merchants, Damien or David Little, will be more than happy to try and discuss it with folk and steer them in the right direction.
Okay, David. Yeah. And just one very, very last one. Just there's a number of questions coming through, but just last one. Tony, well, whether this is in the context of the reseeding or the growing year, but can versus urea / protected urea, Tony?
There has been a significant price advantage with protected urea all year this year. Where would it be next year? My guess is there will be an advantage using protected urea. There's probably something else that's probably not fully, maybe not everybody is aware of, but a lot of the time when CAN is spread on wet land, that essentially there's a release of nitrous oxide. When CAN is sitting on the ground, if you're spreading CAN in the spring and you're maybe seeing water in the tracks, that is far too wet. You'll actually get away with urea in damper conditions, protected urea. Some of the additives prevent leaching as well as volatilization. So I think most people's experience with protected urea, there are a couple of brands on the market, but most people's experience with protected urea has been very positive, you know, and I think from an environmental point of view, it's probably the way to go.
Yeah.
I do expect there to be a price advantage again, more than likely.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. And listen, at that, folks, conscious of time, we've run a little bit over there, but there's been a lot of information and good questions come through there. So I guess it only remains for me to just a few words of thanks. A thanks to our three speakers here who've done an excellent job in terms of presenting some good practical information. Certainly, I would want to thank the girls up in Kilwaughter for keeping us right with the IT, sorry, which is no mean feat in itself. And lastly, a thanks to yourselves, the viewers. There's so many come on this morning, and forwarded to your questions, and I hope that everybody has gained something from this. So with that, I guess all that remains is yet hopefully the weather over the next number of weeks will lend itself to getting a bit of ploughing done or stitching done, whatever the case may be, and keeping those grass swards refreshed and rejuvenated for the year ahead. So at that, all the best, and thank you very much to all.